So with Daniel Midgley from the University of Western Australia, talking to us about building the curriculum, so at the forefront of doing this. Thanks, Daniel.
So as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, there's a bit here where you can actually download the slides you're looking at. If you have a phone or a laptop, you can just do that. I'll give you a moment to get that URL now. And while you're doing that, let me just ask, who is engaged, who's doing work in high schools? Okay, a few of us, okay, ish, have done, ever, yeah, okay, a few more of us. Okay, well, what I'm going to tell you about today is a program in which I and Amy Ward-Gordon and Kate Webster-Blythe have put together a high school curriculum for a private high school in Perth known as Scotch College. And here we are. Amy and Kate are high school teachers. They're at Scotch. They teach French and Spanish. They also dig language, as do we all. And then there's me. I am a presenter on a podcast / radio show called Talk the Talk, and I lecture in linguistics at UWA. So the whole thing started off because Amy and Kate were involved in OSCLA, the Computational and Linguistic Olympiad. So they found that students responded really well, and they wanted to put together a sort of whole program on linguistics that their students could take. They got the go-ahead, so they approached Maria Britz, Dr. Maria Britz from UWA, who got in touch with me, and we all sort of worked together to put together a program and deliver it. We've done it for the past year, and now I'm going to tell you about what we learned. The way that this started was that the teachers and the school were interested in teaching traditional grammar. Everybody loves traditional grammar. If you tell the administrators we want to do a program to teach students traditional grammar, they will say, I don't know what that is, and I love it. Because for some reason this is perceived as some kind of moral force or restoring the moral order. It will turn young ruffians into upstanding citizens. Right? But they were also, Amy and Kate were also interested in helping students develop rote skills, being teachers of French and Spanish. Before I got on the plane to come here, Amy and Kate and I sat down together and had a big old session and talked about everything, and they told me what they wanted to say, and I've included their comments in this presentation. So Kate says, we found ourselves frustrated by the lack of transferable language skills, the capacity to structure sentences and draw from one language to another, and understand that they could use their knowledge of French to learn Spanish if that's what they were doing. So it was really, they were really focused on traditional grammar sort of stuff. And I came along and said, you know what we should also do though? We should also focus on sociolinguistics, have a really strong sociolinguistic angle, because I think that sociolinguistics can make a better world and can make people less terrible. And it can let people know that there's variation and there's change, and we don't have to be grumpy about language, we don't have to judge other people and stuff like that. So I wanted to also include things like pragmatics. What are we doing when we say certain things? What about online communication, which they know very well, these young people are digital natives, and also slang. So this gave students a chance to study something that they knew, that they were experts in, which lowered the barrier quite a bit to what they were able to do. And also it gave them a very important message: your language is worth studying. The way you talk is not stupid or deficient, as many people would like to say. And the reason I know that people like to say this is because I hear complaining comments when I do my weekly radio show on the ABC Radio Perth. Boy, the comments that pour in, people complaining about like, or well, just you know, or literally, or whatever you might have. There's a lot of negative messages directed at young people, and so we wanted to counter that and say, your speech is interesting. I and my whole community are interested in what you are doing. You are inventing language, and that is cool. There is already, as you know, the Victorian English language curriculum. I started off using that as kind of a model, but that took off from there. It's got 4 bits: language and communication, language change, language variation and social purpose, language variation and identity. It's really heavy with the sociolinguistic stuff, and seems to, it does traditional grammar, but it's by no means the focus, which was interesting. our program tended that way as well. When I was thinking about what I wanted to include things like strategies for language learning, learning stuff, learning skills, learning tools, things that you can't look up, a way of thinking about language, but also traditional grammar because that's fun, and also social linguistics. This is what I was thinking of. Like, here are the outcomes. Boy, did I get a wake-up call when I talked to Amy and Kate about what their outcomes were, because take a look. It was these things. Yeah, it's really quite a change. Persistence, perseverance, resilience, and confidence, which was a real thinker for me. Maybe I should approach these kinds of things in my, how do you design activities that do these things? Well, kind of you do already, because, for example, if we studied their own language use, it's kind of empowering for them in ways that I've already mentioned. And then I would learn things from the students as well. For example, I gave them an example of some language that was new, a new usage. Has anyone heard the term big mood, or just mood? Some, the younger folks, yes. When you say mood, that means like I agree, or that's the mood. I'm picking up on your mood. That's the mood I'm having. And they all said, they among themselves, they sort of conferred and said, oh yeah, nosh. I said, what? They said, nosh. What's nosh? They didn't want to say. They said that's like mood. That's when you agree. I said, well, where does it come from? I said, it's okay. You can say. And they said, oh well, it's no shit. They didn't want to say. I'm really tired. Nosh. How about that? I said, do all of you use that? They were like, oh yeah, they'd all heard it. I said, how long have you been saying this? About a year. Started hearing people saying it. And then I went back to Urban Dictionary. Sure enough, there was an entry for nosh. So is this going around? So another outcome for me was, it was just a sneaky way of gathering data on new language use and neologisms, which is not a bad idea. Okay, let's keep on going. Here were the messages that I wanted to send, and I've already mentioned some of these, but I'll reiterate. I wanted to let students know that language has structure on multiple levels, and this is the morphology, syntax, and so on. Language analysis involves pattern recognition and the scientific method, so this is where you can bring in language puzzles and things like that. I wanted to give the message that language changes over time, and this is normal, that language varies between individuals and groups, and that is normal. That there is a strong descriptivist tradition, and the way that I wanted to say that was linguists describe the reality of language without making value judgments. And again, the way you use language is interesting and worth studying. So those are the messages that I wanted to send. And when I would design activities, we would look to these. So the way that the course looked is like this. There were 24 lessons, 24 class sessions that needed to happen. And this was an idea from Amy and Kate. They wanted to bring the students into the university. And then I would take that first session and give them a view of, well, here's what this session is all about. And then what this would do is it would give students a chance to sort of be in a different zone, to sort of have the feeling of the university rub off on them a little bit, and let them know now you are in a place where the knowledge is made. But then what would happen from there is that they would go back to class, have the sessions. I would show up at some of them, which I don't know, for some reason, Kate and Amy said that it made the students feel like that this was serious. I don't know. Like I had this sort of gravitas or something, but it seemed to work. And so I would present some of the sessions. And then, at the end of the term, they would give their presentations, and I would show up for that, and we all would adjudicate. We would all give them markings and ratings. So the effect was to say, well, you start off the term, and here you are coming to me, Daniel the linguist, and then you go and you learn, and I sort of am there to answer questions periodically. But then at the end, I'm coming to you because you are the ones who have made the knowledge. You have looked up things, you found about something, and now I'm coming to you. And it was just kind of a neat thing that I think it had a good feeling, and Kate and Amy both said that they really liked that. Okay, so what kind of things went into these 24 lessons? The idea at first was Oslo Puzzles, because there's a lot of them and they really should be used, and we got permission to use that. it was a good starting, it was kind of a good gateway drug because some students liked them. They are kind of fun. You get going on them and you sort of, oh, what is this? You puzzle it out. And we thought it was a way of teaching linguistic principles, like you do morphemes in Swahili. How do you say this in Kiswahili? And then once you've looked at morphemes and prefixes in Kiswahili, then you can say, okay, well now let's broaden out and look at prefixes in English, or let's look at prefixes in other language, or how is this kind of thing handled? That was the idea, anyway. Amy said everybody thought Oslo was accessible, and it meant that even the kids who typically would struggle with language and not be interested wanted to participate. In actual fact, we found something kind of surprising. The Oslo activities were the least favorite and the hardest to work from. And we sort of tried to figure out why that was. One reason was that it was fun in the competition. In the heat of competition, you could do it, and it was code breaking, and it was fun. Once you got into class outside of the competitive environment, it wasn't as fun anymore. It didn't seem to work as well. The puzzles seemed harder. And also it was, I mean, they're good warm-ups. And they might teach some principles, but getting past the actual activity and extending it turned out to be really difficult in practice, and we found that it was easier to do it some other way. So we ended up in the second iteration, we did this for 3 terms, we ended up dropping a lot of the Oslo activities out. I think it would be possible in theory to still use them, but it was tricky, and we decided that there were other ways. A lesson plan looked kind of like this. There were things that we wanted to get across. There were outcomes, and we tied these back to the language curriculum, the national curriculum and the WA curriculum, which look a lot alike. There was an activity that students would do. Then for teachers, this is the points to make. These are the marks that you want to hit, the messages to convey. There are questions to think about, and then contingency activities, bonus material. And I sort of put this all together and delivered it, and teachers could use it. Here's what some of them look like. The Mad Libs activity, where students have to fill in a silly story with nouns and verbs and so on. Good for exercising parts of speech. That was kind of a favorite. There was an activity on Latin and Greek roots, which students enjoyed. There were things about their language use, for example, a worksheet about like, which gives the message that there are right ways and wrong ways to use like. It's not random. We got students to think about, well, what are you really doing when you say like? If I say the car was like purple, well, how is that different from the car was purple? And it got students to reflect on that. Dr. Ritz wrote an activity about verlan, which is French backwards slang, and is there backwards slang in English? What's that like? And then that led to a discussion of their slang. Alternative English was cool. Just like, what if English was English, but it just had a different set of pronouns? For example, Old English had a singular, a plural, and a dual pronoun. So there would be one word for use, but there would also be the two of yous, and that was a separate word. What if English had that? And so you had to think your way through a worksheet. There was also one on Creole, where students would look at that. Amy said this about activities in Creole. One thing I noticed was that a couple of the kids who are Indigenous students who normally don't speak up, they suddenly were participating. Suddenly that kid could laugh at another student who was doing things wrong, and he was on the other side, and I thought that was really valuable. So representation matters, and being able to use materials that involve that activate the knowledge of the students is really valuable. There were also tools that we would use. So there's a lot of tools, and these were actually the most popular kinds of activities, and I think really valuable as well, because when you have a tool, an online tool like the Google Ngram Viewer, students can have fun doing the activity in class, but this also leads to more discussion and more sort of, hopefully, students using them outside of class. If you haven't used this before, you can search the Google Ngram corpus for different things. For example, I'm looking up in this one, is fled and has fled. You can do this with any verb of arrive, like is arrived and has arrived, or is come and has come. And what you'll see is that is fled is very, very popular until about the 1830s, 1820s, 1840s, depending on the verb you use, and then suddenly has fled or has come takes over. Something was going on around 1820, 1830, 1820, in books anyway. So there's a worksheet associated with this, and students could try it out. There was Youglish, which is a great site. YouTube has a lot of videos that are annotated. And if you want to find out how someone pronounces things, like is it divisive or divisive? Well, you can go to youglish.com and type in divisive, I say divisive, and it'll take you to every YouTube video that has that in its annotations right to that spot. And so you can just hear 100 people say divisive, 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 but just, it's amazing. And there's an activity that students could get their own stats. Like, how do people say 2010? Do they say 2010? Do they say 2010? Do they say 2010? You can just type in the number and get 500 people saying it and count it up. Well, the pink trombone, that was a favorite. This is where you click on this model of the human vocal tract and it'll make sounds, and they thought it was fun. It was a little bit silly, but if you say, well, here are the lips, what kind of sounds do you make with your lips? What kind of sounds do you make with your velum? And it was, it's a fun activity, and it's good to try. They like that one. Others. Okay, so a successful class is more about adaptation than it is about the materials, because teachers have to adapt materials to their own unique abilities and talents. Annie and Kate found that they needed to flesh out a lesson a bit. Even though there were activities, they had to sort of bring in their own knowledge. They didn't get through all the stuff that we did. They tended to take things a lot slower than I would. There's another thing that came up, and that is that the teachers as learners model was very operative. They had to acknowledge that they weren't linguists, but then that meant they got students to do the research. Kate says, as non-linguistic, we haven't done linguistics, we wanted to model that learning process to the kids. So we were supposed to be the learners with them and help them problem solve and overcome challenge rather than the teachers being the font of knowledge, which I think is a really useful way of thinking about it. Let's look it up together. Let's find out. Let's see. One of the things that we noticed was that students were able to reflect on their own language use. And I think that this was one of the things that they did really well. They also investigated data from their own social groups instead of just looking something up. So for example, they looked up emoji use in their social group. They looked up online politeness and okay. I'll give you an example of this. So one student, this is amazing, made a survey off of his own bat. Made up a survey that looked like this. It's a mock-up of a text message. Want to do something today? Sorry, can't. K. And you'll notice this is a capital K with a full stop. And then it's got a question, which is really hard to see. What is the person feeling when they say K? Happy, annoyed, angry. I can't read the last one. So this student tried many possible iterations of K, either OK or K, uppercase, lowercase, full stop, no full stop, and then was able to show how the mood changed when you did a slightly different K, which I thought was just fantastic. Another one was, this one was kind of silly. There's a meme going around when someone dies in a game online. You press F to pay respects. Fine. Okay, well this student had sort of noticed that this was going on, and this was a student that maybe was struggling in other areas of the class, but he had noticed this one thing and commented on it and did a little bit of original work on it. And I was, even though it was not a master's project or anything, I was so glad to see that this student was paying attention to the way that people use language in his social world. Okay. We moved the evaluations around from the end to the middle to the end. Teachers felt, okay, the activities that worked the best weren't the ones that were the most substantive. It was the ones that teachers felt best about, and the ones that they felt comfortable doing, and the ones that worked within their expertise. The worksheet explanations that I gave were good, but in retrospect, what would have really been nice was to have a video walkthrough, somebody actually conducting this, even to an empty room. To see somebody actually taking the activity and using the supporting materials. Kate says, I occasionally felt like maybe I needed an introduction. The handouts were brilliant, but I felt like I needed to flesh out a lesson, whether that was a bit of a clip or something like that, like a video that she could use, or a YouTube video or something to illustrate a principle. Amy and Kate mentioned that their challenges, and this is something to think about if you're the linguist in this kind of situation, developing materials for people who aren't linguists. Not being a linguist was tough, and there was a lack of confidence that they felt very strongly. They also felt the constraints of the high school system. You have to assess students, and you have to do it a certain way. They were the experts in this, I wasn't, so working with them was really important. Having it be the first time through, you know if you teach that even if you know the material well, the first time you take a unit, it's always a bit of a challenge. Even if it's the first time you're doing it after a few years, even if you've done it before. So future iterations, you know, it gets smoother. Doing someone else's materials is tough, and you have to bring in your own sort of stamp on it. And then we also have this thing in English-speaking countries of not studying linguistics. We expect teachers to know grammar and linguistics, and they don't, because they didn't get any, because there's been this cultural thing of not teaching language explicitly for like 100 years. So that is really an uphill battle. The advice, I asked them, what would you change, what would you keep, what would you do differently? They said, watch out for sequencing, make sure that the activities follow on logically from another and don't jump around. And they said, instead of having 24 different lessons, have maybe 12 or even 8, and then do something like a build-up and then an activity and then a breakdown, which is more the way they do it. And that's so not the way I do it in a university tutorial. It's just like one and done, there you go. The activity is the focus of this hour, but they took it quite a bit differently. They liked launching the program at uni, having that first session at uni, and they also liked having me drop in for lessons, but also dropping in for all the student presentations because they felt like that gave it gravitas and the students would take it more seriously. They also said it's important to have the linguist as available as possible. They enjoyed that, and have a kind of mentor relationship with the linguist person, but also having a teacher buddy, having a not a co-teacher, but somebody who knows you and who can offer advice was helpful too. We want to run the program again, and we will if the school approves it. It depends on enrollments and things, so this might happen. There has been talk of a full WACE program having a subject in linguistics, but I think that one takes more time and effort and energy than I have myself. What I would love to do is develop materials, linguistic materials for teachers of other disciplines. Are you a historian? Are you a history teacher? Here's a lesson that you can do on historical linguistics. Are you, what else? Are you a biology teacher? Are you a science teacher? What could you do? So that's the next goal in addition to getting that going. So that's the state of the program at this point. It's been a good experience, and I have learned a lot. Thanks. Okay.
And also beautifully timed.
That's radio, baby. You got to end right on the hour. Sorry.
Questions?
Well, it's great, thank you, really interesting.
Thanks.
Do you include stuff around, so I'm a conversation analyst, so
Oh, cool.
that out. But do you include stuff around interaction and how interaction works, like turn taking and things like that? Is that included at all in terms of how to understand interaction, intersubjectivity, and things like that?
Not explicitly, although we do look, what would be the closest thing? Probably the closest thing would be the like activity, which uses real examples to analyze what like is doing. But I think that would be, tell me what you think what would that add?
I think understanding, I suppose, local context and the way that shapes language, and language use, so that, when you answer a question, for example, like the meaning of the word can change based on where it is in the sequential positioning of the talk. So
Yeah.
I guess that's happening, like, for example,
Like.
What does that mean as an answer? What does it mean, as an intensifier, whatever, like I suppose it's that.
That's cool.
Yeah, or how, like, pitch change or whatever moves, so, like, I suppose bringing it all together in a real situation.
That would be really valuable. That would. The closest thing we did, I think, was we did some things on discourse pragmatic particles, like so at the beginning of a sentence, and well, and things like that. So that was, but yeah, I'm going to take that on board. Hi.
During the presentation, I'm wondering, one of the crucial steps in doing this kind of work is giving teachers the confidence to undertake it. Like as point out, very few people are trained. It's not necessarily going to be a linguist on hand, and thinking about something like Oslo, it'll really be dependent on having that material accessible. In working with these teachers, did you get a sense of what we as linguists could provide them with to, and that would give them a bit of confidence to say, okay, I can take a group through to Oslo, or doing these kind of projects? What could we give them?
So what I gave them initially was, you saw the lesson plan thing with all the, and I tried to really bulk it up with, okay, here's some background, blah, 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 blah. And in fact, this is on the worksheets. If anyone wants to see some worksheets, I can show them to you. Just tug on my arm at some point. I'd be happy to show you whatever I got. There was some background, people might think that this is the case, but you might want to tell students that this is the case, and this is, and I would just fill it up with enough stuff. But what I found was that it was good, but it didn't help increase the confidence of the teachers just reading it. And the best thing that we did was I sat down with Amy and Dr. Ritz, and I said, okay, here's the first one, and let me tell you how I would do this. And I was recording myself and saying, here's how I would do this. I would say da 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 da, and then students would say da 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 da. The video walkthrough idea is probably the best thing, like actually getting in front of a class and doing it so that teachers can see how it's supposed to go, even though they'll do something different. The confidence, like if teachers don't feel confident, it's a hard road. And sometimes the confidence is more a function of the teacher and their teaching style and less about what they know or what they've been prepared with. Like I really do think that that's kind of a personality thing, being able to throw yourself into a class situation with a subject that you know only partly. I think the fact that Amy and Kay are language teachers helped boost their confidence a lot. So in some ways it's kind of partly what you give them, but also partly how their approach to teaching goes. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a comment about exactly that, in a number of sort of teams that I've set up, which have involved linguists and teachers in different parts of Australia, in different sort of language ecologies, we've always sort of stumbled on the fact that you can have information, but if people have not ever seen it done, they don't know how to turn that. They're not silly. Teachers are really smart, they're really good at the space, but they've never seen how do you actually explain past tense for 4-year-olds? They've never seen it. So we developed this thing we called Adopt a School, where we just go in and adopt a school, and we would, demo how to do it. 4 or 5-year-olds to 12-year-olds and beyond, like that. Because of that exact issue, that you've never seen it instantiated, how do you suddenly, just do that? Some people are very creative and confident, but not some.
I think this is a really, really important point, not just for this project, but for like anything, because I saw a tweet where somebody was talking about being able to see the end goal. Being able to see, like, I'm working on a book and I'd never seen a book proposal before. So I approached a publisher and they said, yeah, why don't you do a book proposal like this one? And they gave me a finished book proposal, and then I could see it and go, oh, that's what it's supposed to look like when it's done. And it's good for students to be able to see what it's supposed to look like when it's done, and it's good for us. It's good for teachers to be able to see, oh, that's what it's supposed to look like. Or now at least I can take it from there and do it my own way. And that's such a good principle.
I think also that, as you touched upon with the idea of, sort of, what did you say, like traditional grammar was, sort of had all of these, attended sort of things with it. Lots of people are really nervous of it if they're allowed to play with it, like they would play with other content. We've never seen anyone, say, it doesn't matter if you call it Nautical shit, so you put that in front of it, probably one of those,
Yeah.
They just don't know what to do with this content, and they're not certainly allowed to play with it. Because it's got this kind of unassailable something. What is that? I don't even know what it is, but I see it all the time. I don't know how I would explain it. But so being shown that it's okay by someone like you, I was going to ask, do you come with a white coat?
No, but I should.
Really important.
And just on that note, I was just so impressed with Amy and Kay. Hi, Amy and Kay. I was just so impressed by them being willing to stomp into this area,
Exactly.
class after class, having me deliver this program and having them go, all right, I guess that's what I'm doing. Scary, So any teacher who's willing to do that is I'm impressed.
We can all say very impressive.
Very impressive. Everyone's impressed.
Yes, I'm thinking ahead to the linguistics thing and thinking about how to support Indigenous students
Yeah.
to study linguistics at university so that they can then work on Indigenous languages. Can you see this program helping that? How would you modify it? How would you get it into high schools other than the Scotch College?
This was something that I am probably most concerned about is, gee, I'm doing this for a group of students who are in a Tony high school who are affluent and doing quite well. How do we get this to other high schools as well? How do I expand it? And that's tough because this happened in this high school because it's already doing pretty well and it had the resources, and that, you know, because of that, the school could expand a little bit. I guess to the first point, I would love to do more activities about Aboriginal English and have that be a thing. Just because sometimes there are forms of language that suffer because they're not regarded as high status, and actually teaching them in school as appropriate, in conjunction with maybe consultants who speak the language, can raise the profile, and that's a great thing. And then non-Aboriginal students could be like, oh yeah, we studied this. It's not random or broken, it's not broken English, it actually is a thing that has rules and stuff like that. I don't know how to get it to students who need it the most. So if anybody has any suggestions, I would love to hear it, but my answer is I don't know. Sorry.
Okay, I think at this point we might need to sort of wrap up the formal side of it, but certainly over the half-hour break to informally talk, excuse me, with our speakers. And I hope to see you all back for the second half, which will be focused on the VC English language program, to presentations on that. So an instance where this sort of development has sort of been in place now for about 20 years, and so another set of lessons that we can learn out of all of that. So great. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.